I think this is maybe somewhere that authors struggle too, because you're right. You've got your initial community of people that know and love you, but then what happens after that? So how do you keep your momentum? Because book marketing isn't about the first 30 days. It's about the next 5 years. So you want to kind of create that long game strategy, which means growing your tribe of influence. It means finding your target audience. Where are they spending time? How can you connect with them?
Hi, I'm Maddie Dalrymple, and this week on the Indy Author podcast, I talk with Stephanie Chandler of the Nonfiction Authors Association about leveraging your tribe of influence, including the power of tapping into your existing tribe and of expanding beyond that tribe, the value of beta readers to address the problem of obscurity, the downside of promoting outside your target audience, of selling to other writers, and of relying on the rented real estate of social media, the importance of creating reciprocal relationships, tips for pursuing aspirational contacts, and how each new contact opens a network of others. And now, let's hear from Stephanie. Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Stephanie Chandler. Hey, Stephanie, how are you doing?
Hey, Maddie, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Stephanie Chandler is the author of several books, including the Nonfiction Book Publishing Plan. She's the CEO of the Nonfiction Authors Association, a vibrant community for writers, and the Nonfiction Writers Conference, a live event conducted entirely online since 2010. A frequent speaker at business events and on the radio, she has been featured in Entrepreneur, BusinessWeek, Writer's Digest, and Wired magazine. And I invited Stephanie on the podcast because I heard her speaking on the idea of leveraging your existing tribe of influence. And listeners to the podcast know that, we're often talking about what you can do once I've identified the group of people that you want to reach out to. But what I really liked is Stephanie was sharing the perspective that you probably have a bigger tribe than you already realize, and that you're not starting from zero. You already have a pool of people to tap into. And so, Stephanie, I'm really just going to open it up with that introduction, and we'll see where the conversation takes us in terms of realizing who your tribe already is.
Great. I love that. So yeah, this is something that I do every time I launch a new book. I'm going through it right now. I have a book coming out in January. And so I will sit down and think about, who do I know? And maybe people I haven't connected with in some time. You and I are busy people. We have lots of friends in the industry. So I will make a long list of people that I know, and I will go through my emails. I will look through my social media contacts, because we forget when we lose touch with people. And the other thing I'd like to recommend to authors is beyond your own industry. Who do you know in your own circle? This could be people you went to school with, former coworkers, neighbors, people that you coached your kid's soccer team with 10 years ago. And let me just say that these people who have been friends or acquaintances in your life, when you have a book coming out, that's really exciting, especially to people who haven't written a book. And so letting them know that this is happening, they want to support you. They want you to be successful. And I think about how I come from the Silicon Valley. And if I wrote technology books, you can bet I would be reaching out to all of my former coworkers who are now at 25 different software companies. They've moved on in the last 20 years. But I'd be reaching out and saying, hey, do you want to buy books to give away to your staff? Do you want to buy books to give to your customers? Can you bring me in to do a speaking engagement? Can you put me on your podcast? Can I contribute to your blog or your company magazine? So that's kind of the point of this exercise, is to really spend some time digging into who do you know and how might they be able to help you successfully launch and promote your book.
Yeah, I know that when I left the corporate world after a couple of decades, I had hundreds and hundreds of LinkedIn contacts. And then there was a period of time where I wasn't tapping into them at all, because I just thought, oh, well, that's from a different life, and they don't need to know what I'm doing now. But I changed my mind about that for all the reasons that you just said. And I think that the other thing that's really interesting is that I realized a book launch or two ago, I was comparing the book launch, which was just like, hey, everybody, I have a new book. Like, it was the world's most pathetic book launch. And I think back to my earlier book launches where, I would have a happy hour at a local bar and, kind of do it up more. And I realized that part of that is that when I was launching my early books, my pool of acquaintances were all non-writers. And so, like you were saying, if you write a book, it's big news with that group of people. Whereas now my pool of acquaintances is mainly writers. And you say, oh, I'm launching a book. And we're like, big whoop, because, they all launched a book like yesterday.
I will say one of my pet peeves is writers trying to sell to writers. Whenever I go to speak at a local writers group or at a writers conference, writers are constantly trying to sell each other their books. And that is just missing the point to me. With marketing, you really want to know your target audience and explain what's in it for them to read your book. So when you're promoting your book to fellow writers, unless we read the same genre, to me, that is not your best use of your time. So, and then there's that crossover between those people that Well, like I said, my former coworkers are in the Silicon Valley. I write books for, writing, right? And nonfiction publishing and marketing books. And most of them probably aren't interested in that. So they're not my main tribe I'm focused on. I'm focusing on people who can potentially support the book in some way, are interested in the book. Now, I will say one coworker comes to mind who now works at Google. Google has a speaker series. So guess what? I will be reaching out to him because, there's that old statistic that we don't know where it came from, but they says that 80% of people want to write a book. So that's always something I could lean on for that.
I think that writers early in their careers, when you launch your first book, then chances are you're going to sell it to like your mom, your neighbor, and your college roommate or whatever. And I think there's also a transition to understanding that your tribe changes from the people who want to buy your book because they know and like you to the people who want to buy their book because they actually are interested in your book topic and the genre and the things you have to say. And that you maybe don't want to keep hammering that initial tribe. If you graduated past mom and your neighbor and the person you went to school with, is that a mindset shift about understanding the tribe?
Well, yeah, and expanding your reach, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is maybe somewhere that authors struggle too, because you're right. You've got your initial community of people that know and love you, but then what happens after that? So how do you keep your momentum? Because book marketing isn't about the first 30 days. It's about the next 5 years. So you want to kind of create that long game strategy, which means growing your tribe of influence. It means finding your target audience. Where are they spending time? How can you connect with them? I'm a huge believer in building your own email list, getting involved. For example, does your target audience, are they involved in any kind of trade association? And if so, can you go participate in that trade association? Maybe you write books about dog care. There's lots of associations for dog lovers and dog owners and dog trainers. So what events do they have that you could participate in? Or could you write for their blog or their newsletter? Can you get involved and get to know them? And who else is influential in that space? How can you connect with them? So yeah, there's definitely that next step where you're expanding out from your smaller circle to try to create bigger circles.
I think that's a real plug for getting beta readers even early on. Like most of the authors I know who actively use beta readers are authors who are later in their career. But I think it really behoove a first-time author to tap into that beta reader pool and understand what the differences are. Like you may love dog care and you've done a lot of research and have a lot of experience in it, but you're not spending all your time with that community of people. Like you have to expand your community of people and to encompass your new and expanded group of people. And I think beta readers can not only help improve a book, but can also help identify where that pool is.
Yeah, I agree. I love beta readers for a whole bunch of reasons, but finding that pool and asking them, what other groups do you belong to? What online groups do you participate in? That's a hugely underutilized opportunity, I feel, for writers. I happen to be a widow and I'm involved in a number of online widows groups. Now, imagine if I ever wrote the widow memoir, right? And I've been involved in these groups for years. I immediately have access to thousands of people and I've made friends with the admins and I can say, hey, can I do a call for beta readers. Hey, do you want to do a book giveaway? So yeah, finding your community and getting engaged somehow is a huge step in creating that long game with your book marketing strategies.
Yeah, I think that really paves the way to starting to understand your marketing before you launch your first book, because I know a lot of writers who finish their first book and they've kind of been working out in isolation, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and then they're ready to start promoting it and they don't know where to go to. But if they've been building that community, the online community or the associations or all those things that you mentioned, then they're ahead of the game. And it probably improves their book too, because if they're immersing themselves in that community, it can only be a benefit to the content they're producing.
Absolutely. Just dovetail off the beta reader thing, right? So I get this question a lot, how many beta readers do I have and where do I find them? Well, it depends on what your goals are with your beta readers, right? So a lot of writers want editorial feedback on their work. I personally really value beta readers for marketing, right? So if you give early access to your manuscript to a bunch of people and they like the book, they're going to be incentivized to want to share it when your book is launching. So it's a matter of starting with your smaller circle. And maybe it's even asking them, who do you know who would enjoy this book? Who do you know that's in this sphere, that's in this target audience that we could invite to be a beta reader? And I'm of the belief that you should get lots of beta readers. 2 or 5 or 10 is a very small number, especially when it comes to getting support with the marketing. So I like to suggest lots of beta readers. And then I see all the authors kind of, recoil but that means I'm giving my work away. But you can actually view it as you're also creating fans. So getting the most eyeballs on your work possible is actually a great marketing strategy, because those people will go out and tell their friends about it. When I did my last book launch, pleasantly surprised and touched by how many of the beta readers turned out and bought the book anyway, even though they'd already read it. And that was just a show of support. So, it's those things to think about when you're starting your tribe of influence exercise and figuring out who and how many people you're going to give that early access to.
Can you give any guidelines for if someone is launching their first book, how many people they should be comfortable giving it out to, and then maybe how that number changes, if it changes over time as a person accumulates more books and more followers?
So I always think about Seth Godin. He has famously said, your problem is not that people are going to steal your content. Your problem is obscurity, right? So I think a lot of authors fear that people are going to steal their work and share it. And I'll tell you, when I do my beta reader stuff and I put out PDFs, it says in there, feel free to send this to a friend. And the reason I do that is because, I want I want as many eyeballs as possible. I don't view that as lost sales. I view that as a way to gain sales. So my personal feeling is the more the merrier. I had 400 beta readers on my last book launch. And I'll tell you what, you'll be lucky if 10% of them actually write a review and follow through. But guess what? On social media that day, I saw so many of them sharing. I got a lot of feedback. It was a really incredibly valuable experience on a whole bunch of levels. So the more, the better. And the same thing goes with the review copies that you either send out prior or during your book launch, right? So I have a whole separate plan to send out physical copies to fellow influencers in our space and people that I know are going to support the book and people that I want to interview me for their podcast. So I really invest in sending out a lot of copies of the book with the goal of it leading to more sales as a result.
And I'm curious what tool you use. Do you have something like BookFunnel or something like that you use to send those out?
We do. Yeah, I use BookFunnel. We love it. It's a great tool, really worthwhile, and it helps you kind of control that process and make it easy for everybody. So BookFunnel, I'm a big fan.
That's really interesting. I've always thought that, 2 to 10 beta readers was not enough, but I've never thought about 400. That's really interesting. I have a book launch coming up. I'm going to rethink that because I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I initially had thought, okay, I think I'd like to have 100 beta readers. And that was my plan. This was the first time I leveraged beta readers. And so I sent out the call to my email list and I had 400 applicants and I didn't want to turn anybody away. So I accepted them all. And I'm really glad I did.
That's interesting. You know, I think different people bring a different interpretation to beta reader. So can you just describe a little bit what you're thinking of when you say beta reader and how you're using them beyond what we've already talked about?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people like editorial feedback from beta readers. And let me just say, I would not want editorial feedback from 400 people. So let's be really clear. That's too many.
Yeah.
I was more viewing them as my launch team, right? So they were getting early access. They were kind of following along with the process. Hey, we're going to press. Hey, here's the release date. Hey. And so I kind of created a community with my beta readers, but I wasn't seeking editorial feedback. So I was seeking support with the book launch. And so it just really depends on what your goals are. Now, if you're seeking editorial feedback, 100 is probably too many. When you get too many cooks in the kitchen, it can really overwhelm you. So maybe that's the point where you say 20 or 30 people that are in your target audience or that you really trust to give you good editorial feedback. And then maybe you have a separate group of beta readers specifically for the marketing support.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just a quick break from the interview. Are you getting value from the podcast? Please consider supporting it and all the work I do at the Indy Author by becoming a patron. To pledge a monthly contribution, go to patreon.com/the Indy Author, or to make an occasional contribution, perhaps to indicate the value that a specific episode or resource provided to you on your creative voyage, scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. And now, back to the interview.
Do you feel as if the way you tap into your one's growing tribe of followers differs depending on release frequency? So if someone's releasing a book a month, then they're sharing it with their closest pool of followers, their beta readers, whoever that might be, just by definition, they're going to retain interest because there's not this long downtime in between. But if someone's releasing a book every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, something like that, do you recommend a different approach to keep your tribe engaged?
Yeah. I mean, and I will say in my nonfiction space, I don't see a lot of authors releasing more than a book a year. So, but either way, you definitely need to figure out ongoing connection with your readers. I personally like to do that through content marketing, and that's what you do, right? So whether you're blogging, you're creating videos, you're doing a podcast, to me, those are kind of 3 of the foundational strategies for marketing to your audience. And you're doing that through sharing interesting content. In the nonfiction space, we're doing more of teaching typically. In the fiction space, you have to get more creative, right? So what will engage your audience? And I've seen a lot of fiction writers do really interesting things. Like I met a romance writer once who would give like tips on how to be romantic or dating tips or, as a way to engage her readers that would be interested in her books. And similar things like, gosh, I'm drawing a blank on his name. He's a San Francisco based writer and he writes mystery novels set in San Francisco. And he ended up kind of getting known in the city as he got involved in the literary scene there. And then he started writing about life in San Francisco. And he was invited to write a column for the New York Times on San Francisco. Now, talk about a great way to engage people and then ultimately promote the book. So we're always looking for ways to continue connecting with potential target readers and then ultimately bring them into the email list, because I think we've been a little bit oversold on social media. Now, that's not true for everybody. Some people, you've got influencer status and you've got a really engaged social media audience. That's great. But I would personally take email over social media every day, all day, because social media, you're on rented real estate. We learned this the hard way. We had a Twitter account for the Nonfiction Authors Association that literally evaporated. We lost 70,000 followers overnight.
It's
Never found out why. We hadn't violated any policies. I spent months trying to get anybody to help, to restore it. It went away. But guess what? Our email list we own the content, we own the data. So maybe constant contact goes away, but we still own the content, the context. So we can take it and put it elsewhere. So just be aware of that with social media. Putting all your eggs in a basket makes me really nervous.
Yeah, I think there's probably never been a time where the environment of social media has made it so clear that no one should be relying on it to keep in touch with anyone.
Right?
And yeah, I think that of all the advice I've ever spoken to, either on the podcast or elsewhere, the one thing that everybody agrees on is the importance of an email list. And I think every opportunity to sort of emphasize that topic is great, or emphasize that piece of advice is great. So we talked a little bit about how you should not leave behind the tribe you bring with you into your writing life, assuming people are, moving from some other work, or they've built a community in some other way and they're moving forward. Are there any people that you should explicitly not try to bring forward into your tribe? And the example I'm thinking of is that there's the advice out there that when you're launching your first book, you probably shouldn't be asking your mom, your neighbor, and your college roommate to buy it, because on Amazon, then you'll start getting bizarre also buys. And, if your mom's a big knitter, you're going to see your noir mystery novel next to a knitting book. Are there other practical downsides of trying to bring people forward into your tribe that you're drawing from a different community?
I mean, I would never turn away a sale. So I will just say that if my mom wants to buy my book, she doesn't. But if she wanted to buy my book, she could. You do have to be, careful about reviews. Aunt Edna writes, I loved Susie's book. It was amazing. And she's such a great niece. Like, you don't want that kind of thing to happen. But I guess when you say, who do you not want to promote to? I just don't want to promote outside of my ideal target audience. And yeah, so let's say my mom and my brother and 3 family members buy the book. That's great. It shouldn't screw up the algorithms if my target audience is also buying the book, right? So it's all the more reason to be growing that audience. And also, the tribe of influence starts with the people we know, but it should expand out to the people that you want to know, right? So who are the fellow authors in your field? Who are the fellow influencers, the podcasters? Those should all be on your list for your tribe of influence that you want to connect with in one way or another, whether you're sending them a copy of the book or pitching them to be on the podcast, whatever it is. Those are part of that community too. But as far as, don't waste your time promoting your book to the wrong readers. People send me books all the time. And I will tell you, I don't read World War history. I don't have young kids anymore. There's so many types of books that are sent to me that I don't read, and I don't review books either. So spending your time and money sending books to people that aren't your target audience. Now, when someone sends me a publishing industry book, I absolutely pay attention, and that may lead to them being interviewed on our blog or our podcast or whatever it is. So just know your audience is so critical to building that community and that strategy, that marketing strategy.
When someone is reaching out to someone who's one of those influencers, do you recommend, let's say they have a new nonfiction book and they've located the pool of people who might legitimately be interested in it. Do you recommend that they try to establish a relationship ahead of time? Or is, a book that shows up in your office about the topic that you're actually interested in, is that intriguing? Is it off-putting? What would your recommendations be on that front?
I think you have a much better chance if it aligns, right? And I love to include a personal note. So, really enjoy your podcast. Why haven't you written a book yet? Something like that. So I don't think that's off-putting at all. What is off-putting to me as somebody who gets a ton of solicitations is the solicitation. Like, somebody sending me a message saying, hey, I have a new book out. Why don't you put me on your podcast?
What can you do for me?
Right. Yeah. And it's not about my audience. Like, tell me how you serve my audience. I got a pitch just last week from a speaker, and it was all about him and how he speaks on leadership, and he's a great leadership speaker. And if I have a conference or event coming up, I should really contact him because he's a great speaker. He's now sent this to me twice. And I don't know how he's getting booked, because that had nothing to do with how he would serve our target audience. Meanwhile, someone like Ann Janzer, I love her. She writes great books. She creates great content. So she'll come out and say, hey, I created this new, I had a great successful book promotion campaign. Would you be interested in doing a webinar on how I did it? Heck yeah, I would. That's interesting to my audience, right? She's a nonfiction writer. She figured out how to do this. It landed 50 more reviews on her book. So knowing your target audience and putting that value proposition in when you're pitching or when you're reaching out. The other thing that you can do, if you have your own podcast or blog, reach out and ask to interview that person before you ever try to sell them anything or give them your book, or, make it something in it for them to create that reciprocal relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that some people take the opinion that if they send an email to 1,000 podcasts, then, they're going to piss off 990 of them, but they might get 10 placements. But I would also warn them that you're building bad karma. And I remember, I have a list, and if people are spamming me with that kind of thing, even if they come back later and they have a good, I'm not even reading the pitch after a while if I know that this is somebody who's been annoying me in the past with inappropriate, not inappropriate, but, misaligned pitches. And I do think that anyone who's ever submitting something or pitching themselves to someone or something should have the experience of being on the other side of the pitch, because I know I never fully appreciated. I was probably one of those people who would have complained about I sent this to an agent, or I sent this into a contest and they didn't even give me a review. And having been a contest judge in several short fiction contests now, I'm like, oh man, if you see it from the other side, you know what's going on.
Right.
I think everybody should have an opportunity to be in that position every once in a while.
Great point. And following the directions of a pitch, right? Because a lot of times podcasters have specific requests, or answer these 3 questions.
Yeah.
And then people don't do that. We have a call for guests for our podcast, and it's very specific. How does your topic help authors in some way? And then we get pitches on mental health and medical things. And it's what does this have to do? How are you going to tie this into writers? Because we're not doing it for you, and it's not there in your pitch.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We can all clip this out and have it as a little tutorial on our websites about, if you want to pitch to us, here's what you should keep in mind. So we've talked about a little bit about bringing forward your existing tribe, how to, just a couple of ideas about how to support and cater to your evolving tribe. I'm wondering if you can also talk a little bit about the aspirational tribe. I have, so on my tickler list, Stephen King, if you're out there, on my tickler list is that someday when I have the perfect question to ask, I'm going to get in touch with Stephen King and ask him to be on the podcast, because he seems like the kind of guy who might say, isn't this cute? A person with a podcast. I think I'll do that just as a lark. I haven't done that yet because I haven't come up with a question I want to ask yet. But do you have recommendations for how people can identify the appropriate aspirational tribe members they want to engage, and then how they should go about doing that?
So I'm one of those people that believes you have nothing to lose from asking, right? So you want to, let's even put this in the context of getting endorsements for your book, because those can be tricky.
Yeah.
Right. But so here's how I've gotten endorsements, especially earlier on when I didn't even really have much of my own community. I messaged a lot of big name authors on social media, and they answer their own messages. And those pitches weren't, oh, my first book is coming out and I'm self-publishing it. And I would really love it. And here's what it's all about. Because I get those pitches too. And they're 9 paragraphs long. No. If you want to look like a pro, it's no more than 2 paragraphs. This book is coming out. I love your work, pay a compliment. And I was amazed at how many well-known authors I got to endorse my books simply by contacting them through social media. The other thing is, once you start to build your platform, so I'm thinking we run this Nonfiction Writers Conference every year. back in 2010, we were doing it by teleseminar. Remember when that was a thing before we were using Zoom and all these great visuals? But I started with my tribe of influence. Our opening speaker, the very first year, was Dan Pointer. He was a wonderful mentor to a lot of us in publishing. He wrote self-publishing books. And then each year, as my sphere grew, I was inviting people. And then I started getting really brave and inviting people I didn't know. And that's how I got Julia Cameron, Anna Quinlan, Cheryl Strayed, Seth Godin, Don Miguel Ruiz, Martha Beck, Dan Millman. I just started asking. So once you're able to show some platform as well, that also really helps. And so I tell our community, let that be your motivation, right? Your motivation for building your audience, because the fact is, the bigger your audience gets, the easier it is to get yeses from podcasts and influencers and things like that. It all starts to kind of create this snowball effect.
Yeah. And I think the more you can demonstrate your professionalism, the better. And professionalism doesn't necessarily equate to experience. Like, more experience makes professionalism easier, but it's not a necessity for professionalism. And writing a pitch, and I try to frame this carefully, so I'm not suggesting that you lie about your experience, but framing a pitch as if you've been on a million podcasts and you feel confident in what you have to offer without making any claims beyond what you actually have to offer. And the story, I told this before, but I think it's such a good illustration of this, is I was contacted by someone who wanted to be a guest on the podcast because he had his first nonfiction book coming out, and it would be his first interview. So he didn't have any like other interviews to point me to, but he recorded an interview specifically to pitch me for the podcast. Like, it was him talking on video for a couple of minutes about his book. And very specifically to me, like, this wasn't a generic thing. He had created this video for me. And so I could see, like, he knew his topic. He was comfortable on camera. He was, all the things that I would look for in a guest. And the fact that he had never been on any other podcast didn't make a difference, because he had proven that he had the professionalism, even if he didn't have the experience. And I think that can go a long way if you're aiming for those more aspirational connections.
For sure. One more tip too, like with the endorsement thing. Let's say you get your very first big name one, because this is how I did it, right? So when I sent my pitch, I'll say, you'll be in good company, because here's what Michael Gerber had to say about the book.
Yeah.
Right. And then this influencer goes, oh, wow, she got Michael Gerber. I totally need to do this.
Yeah.
Right. So leverage your tribe, especially if you can get an introduction.
Yeah.
Right. With fellow authors, we know people. Right. And so can someone introduce you to a well-known person that you can then get your first endorsement and then show that to others? So you're right. All that professionalism really does help.
Yeah. And I think in any of those, like, I was thinking back to the social media message in order to get a blurb, that I think a sort of, nothing's foolproof, but saying, I think that this book would appeal to the people who follow you because, like, if you can fill that in, you're halfway there, because you're illustrating that you're not, of course, you're serving yourself, but your intent is to serve the people that the person you're contacting wants to serve too, their own followers, and that you're looking out for them. You're not looking out for yourself. And that's certainly true for podcast pitches. I'm sure you found this, that if somebody says, here's a topic that I think will be especially meaningful to the people who listen to your podcast, then you're a prick up.
I wish I could remember the author's name, but she had written a real life memoir based on a story that Judy Blume had written about. Judy Blume is one of my favorite childhood authors, but she wrote a number of adult books. So she had written a book about this actual story that happened to this woman who wrote her memoir. Well, she reached out to Judy Blume, and guess what? Judy Blume asked for the book. She wrote about it on social media. I mean, they actually created a connection over that. Somebody that is such a major beloved author, and she created that connection. So you're absolutely right. Don't be afraid to reach out. That's what I say.
Yeah. Well, there can't be a better story than that to end our conversation about expanding one's tribe of influence. But Stephanie, thank you so much. Appreciate you entertaining my wide-ranging questions about tapping into one's tribe of influence. So please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
Yeah, thank you. Check us out, Nonfiction Authors Association.com. We have a huge community of active writers at all stages in the process. We have our upcoming Nonfiction Writers Conference. That's also nonfictionwritersconference.com. And then I have a new book launching in January, the Nonfiction Book Marketing and Launch Plan. It's actually an 8.5 by 11 workbook and planning guide, 250 plus pages. It's not full of blank pages. It's really, really meaty. It's my favorite thing I've done so far. So I'm looking forward to that and appreciate you having me here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.